So I'm Mashal. I'm an Android engineer at GudangAda, and the topic of my session is navigation within Android. So, what is navigation? When we talk about navigation, what we're referring to is moving from one screen to another. Before navigation component, this was handled manually by the developer through either intents in case of activities and through fragment transactions for fragments. This would create a lot of inconsistencies within the application because the developer was supposed to manually handle the navigation as well as like the back button of the device, which would and the up button in the action bar, which would create a lot of inconsistency. So so what is navigation component and what does it do? Sorry. Navigation component automates all of this for us. We don't need to handle navigation or like the toolbar navigation ourselves. We just have to identify different destinations within the app or different screens within the app, then the actions that would take us from one destination to another, and simply add that code that connects the user interaction, like let's say a button click with the navigation. This is how compact the code becomes with navigation component. So here's like the top level overview of the navigation component. One, it is a collection of libraries, tooling, and plugins that simplify Android navigation for us. It basically provides a map for all the navigation present in the app, highlighting the destinations as well as the action that takes us from one destination to another. It also handles backstack for the fragments itself. That is, when we navigate from one fragment to another, we don't have to worry about the previous fragment. Nav component automatically handles all of this for us. It also handles fragment transactions, which is as in when we identify a transaction from one destination to another. It sorry, we just yeah. So it automatically handles the navigation from one destination to another. We just have to identify the destination we want to go to in the graph, and then simply call that action in our code. It also handles type-safe argument passing, as in when we move from one fragment to another, we can identify or send data from one fragment to another. And it also provides us with type safety, which means that and by type safety, what we mean is that the compiler will validate types while compiling and throw an error if you assign the wrong type to a variable. It also allows us to access a deeper part of the application from outside, which is called deeplinking. And this is something we're going to be discussing in the later part of the session. And finally, it centralizes and visualizes navigation related information and puts it in one central location in the code. So when we talk about navigation component, it's important to understand that there are three parts working together in harmony. So the three parts are navigation graph, NavHostFragment, and Nav Controller. And it's important to understand how they sort of all link to each other to make the navigation actually occur within the code. So this is the navigation graph, which is an XML file. It contains both a design view and an editor and centralizes all the information related to navigation and basically provides a map of your application. Here, you can add fragments and activities in the nav graph, which are called destination, as in they're the places you can navigate to and from. Then the arrows over here are called actions, which is a path basically a user can take to navigate from one screen to another. The action lets you define stuff like arguments you want to pass while navigating. And also, this is the action that you trigger when you want to navigation to actually happen. Next up, we have a nav host fragment, which is a container for fragments, or it is an area or host within the layout for self-contained navigation to occur, which in a way, what we're trying to say here is that it's basically an empty space or an holder where we want to show or display our fragments. So nav host fragment is basically is what swaps in and out different destinations included in the nav graph. So when you navigate from one destination to another, nav controller swaps the current destination with the new one. So here, it's important to note that the default nav host fragment ensures that the system back button is intercepted correctly, and the nav graph attribute is what links nav host fragment with the navigation graph. Lastly, the third part of the navigation component is Nav Controller. This is what does most of the work behind the scenes. It contains the logic we need to swap destinations in and out of the nav host fragment. Each nav host fragment has a nav controller that we use in our code, and this is where the navigation actually happens. When we write this code, what we're doing is we're pointing towards the action and instructing the nav controller to swap the current fragment with the mentioned in the with the one mentioned in the action. So that's pretty much it about the navigation component itself. So when we talk about navigating from one component or one destination to another, we probably want to pass some data or arguments as part of it. So for instance, let's say we navigate from a product listing screen to a product detail screen. We would probably want to pass a product ID as part of the argument, so the detail screen would know which product's information to fetch. So data passing is actually good and preferred because then we don't have to have global data or share data just so two destinations could have access to it. And it also encapsulates our data, which means that when we pass data from one fragment to another, nothing outside of that scope has access to it. So navigation, the component that allows data passing is called safe Args. So what exactly is safe Args? It is a Gradle plugin that offers a neater way to pass data from one fragment to another, and it automatically generates the code for us to deal with bundles. So we don't have to write the tedious code for bundles that we used to previously because SafeArgs automatically does this for us. It also provides us with type safety, which we discussed in the which we just discussed, which means that the destination fragment knows what sort of data type to expect. For instance, let's say if you have declared a type data type, let's say Boolean, and you try to pass string in the in the argument, the compiler would throw you an error. So to declare an argument in the NavGraph, this is how it's done. You need to define three parameters. First is the name of the argument that we will use in our code to access it. Then its type. For instance, the type over here is integer, but it could also be a custom parcelable type, or it could even be an enum class. Then its default value as well. Default value is the value of the argument when no argument is passed. This is obviously optional, not mandatory. And lastly, nav component also gives us the liberty to make an argument type nullable. So to send and retrieve arguments, this is how it's done. You define directions, which is the action you're going to take, and send the data as part of the method argument. And then on the other side, as in the destination fragment, you can retrieve that argument through NavArgs. This is how easy and simple it is to send data and send and retrieve data from using safe orgs. So lastly, the last component of our section is deep linking. What is deep linking? So deep linking is basically being able to access a deeper part of the application without having to clicking through all the fragments in the hierarchy to reach that destination. It's important. So basically, the launcher icon is not the only way to access an Android app. I mean, we have, let's say, notifications, we have app widgets, we have web URLs that take us directly into the specific screen within the app. So we have two types of deep links. One is implicit deep links, and the other is explicit deep links. So implicit deep links are deep links that always take you to the same static destination within the application. That is, every time you click on, let's say, a shortcut, it would always take you to the same destination. Then we also have explicit deep links, which is something that uses a pending intent to get the data present in the deep link and then decide what destination to navigate to. So wrapping up, this is pretty much it for my presentation. We talked about what navigation component is. It's three parts, which is NavHostFragment, Navigation Graph, and Nav Controller. Then we talked about how navigation component centralizes all the navigation related information and how to pass data through safe Args. Lastly, we also talked about deep linking. So this is pretty much it from my side. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope this was useful for you. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Someone asked whether it's bad practice to have more than one navigation graph.
I wouldn't say it's a bad practice because, if anything, we are also using multiple navigation graphs in the current project I'm working on at work. But I think different or using multiple graphs or nested graphs are actually useful to organize and like reuse different sections of the app's UI. So I think, yeah, it's not a bad practice at all. And if anything, it's actually good to have multiple nav graphs to sort of like streamline and unify things.